The day they bulldozed my great-grandfather's stone bridge was the day I stopped being polite. It wasn't just rock and mortar. They crushed 100 years of legacy with one arrogant roar. 6:00 a.m. Fog over Lake Morrison. I was sipping coffee when I heard the growl diesel engines in the mist. Then it broke through a yellow bulldozer, crawling straight toward the only thing tying my family to this land. No notice, no vote, no mercy. Just steel jaws and the snap of something sacred breaking forever. Victoria Harlow, HOA, president with a God complex, called it an eyesore. But what she didn't know, my great-grandfather didn't just build that bridge, he built the dam. And inside that dam sat a right legal binding generational, the right to control every drop of water her resort depended on. This wasn't just property, it was power, and I had just inherited it. My name's Jake Morrison. I'm 28, a civil and environmental engineer. 3 months ago, I inherited the most beautiful piece of lakefront property in Texas, along with the bridge my great-grandfather built in 1923. It wasn't some backyard DIY project. He hand-cut limestone blocks, hauled them from the quarry, and stacked them into a perfect archway. That bridge connected our cabin to the main road. Kids crossed it on their way to fishing holes. Old-timers waved from trucks full of tools. It wasn't just stone, it was the spine of our community. When I walked it each morning, boots creaking on weathered planks, I could almost hear his voice in the breeze. Sarah, my wife, and I had dreamed of retiring here quiet mornings, consulting work, fishing at dawn. Then Victoria Harlow moved in, and in 6 months she decided we didn't belong. Not our truck, not our cabin, and definitely not our bridge. It started with a letter. Certified. Heavy envelope. The kind that makes your stomach drop before you even open it. Inside, a cheerful letterhead from the Whispering Pines HOA. Signed by Victoria Harlow herself. Apparently, my bridge violated architectural standards outlined in HOA Covenant 47B. The letter demanded I remove it within 30 days or face $500 daily fines. No negotiation, no inspection, just a threat wrapped in legalese. I actually laughed at first. This bridge was here before her community even existed, before her BMW ever touched a paved road. But Victoria had done her homework, or thought she had. She didn't see heritage. She saw inconvenience. She didn't see a legacy. She saw leverage. Sarah tried to stay hopeful. "We have the law on our side," she whispered over dinner. I nodded, but in my gut, I knew. Being right might not be enough. 3 days after the letter, they showed up. 2 men in matching polos, clipboards in hand, standing at the edge of my property line. HOA Compliance Patrol 1 grunted, said my grass exceeded regulation height 3 inches max, then the dock wood discoloration, the mailbox non-compliant shade of black. They even cited me for a fishing net visible from the road. Each violation came with a fine. By the second week, I owed over $1,200. They weren't enforcing community standards. They were weaponizing them. I caught Victoria smiling smugly from across the lake one morning, white heels clicking on concrete phone to her ear, sunglasses reflecting my frustration. Sarah tried to calm me, but it felt like the walls were closing in, like we were prisoners in our own damn cabin. And deep down, I knew this wasn't about rules. This was about control, about erasing us. It wasn't enough to fine me for my mailbox. Victoria wanted to ruin me. Personally. A week later, Sarah came home with red eyes. She said, "You've been seeing Eva." Eva, the widowed neighbor 2 cabins down. Apparently a rumor had spread, that I'd been comforting her too often, that Sarah deserved better, that I was unstable, unfaithful, dangerous. The worst part, it wasn't random gossip. It started in a private HOA Facebook group Victoria moderated. She didn't just weaponize rules, she weaponized shame. At the next HOA social, she made sure Sarah was surrounded. Backhanded comments. Poor dear. Sympathetic stares like we were a broken couple on the verge of collapse. I didn't recognize the community anymore. We were being erased with smiles and fake pity. They weren't just trying to take our land, they were trying to take our dignity. And they were damn close. I stopped sleeping. Every creak in the floorboards felt like another violation letter coming. But if Victoria wanted a war, she picked the wrong engineer. I went digging, literally. Up into the dusty attic where my grandfather stored everything from fly rods to tax records. The air smelled like cedar dust and time itself. That's where I found it. A cracked leather binder, faded ink, and legal documents dating back a century. Survey maps, deed transfers, and then the gold, a grandfathering clause that protected existing historic structures from architectural revision. Signed, stamped, sealed. The bridge wasn't just old, it was untouchable. I felt my pulse slow. The law wasn't just on my side, it was etched in history. I was holding a loaded briefcase and Victoria had no clue. Now it wasn't about survival. It was about setting things right and making sure she regretted ever touching that bridge. The community center smelled like stale coffee floor wax and institutional hopelessness. I walked in holding a banker's box filled with a century-old proof papers so yellowed they looked like relics, not evidence. I laid the documents out on the folding table like a royal flush. Survey maps, deed history. The grandfathering clause clearly exempting my bridge from modern HOA regulations. I expected discussion. I expected questions. Instead, Victoria didn't even sit down. She gave my papers a 3-second glance and said, "Times change, Mr. Morrison. Progress requires sacrifice." Her voice was smooth, condescending, like she was explaining math to a child. Then came the vote, 5-2 in favor of enforcement. The old-timers on the board, Tom and Mrs. Chen, looked ashamed. The rest, smug silence. Walking out gravel, crunching beneath my boots, I realized something brutal. This was never about rules. This was about power, and I was their target. It started small, annoying. A notice about weeds growing too close to the mailbox. A warning that our dock needed cosmetic resealing. Then a $250 fine for a non-compliant shed paint color that had been the same shade of brown since 1985. But then came the patrols. 2 men, clipboard warriors, showed up twice a day. They'd circle my property, squint at flower beds, measure grass height like it was national security. One morning, I watched them photograph a welcome mat Sarah bought from a roadside stand. Too wide, apparently. Another $150. By week 3, I was staring at a wall of violation letters and $1,800 in fines. It didn't feel like community enforcement. It felt like coordinated harassment. I called the number on the HOA compliance truck, Prescott Security Solutions, owned by Rick Prescott, Victoria's husband. Cute. They weren't just enforcing rules, they were bleeding us dry one technicality at a time. Engineers don't panic, we investigate. So, while Victoria played her little HOA dictator fantasy, I poured coffee and opened my laptop. First stop, the Texas Department of Public Safety Contractor Registry. I typed in Prescott Security Solutions. Nothing. Then I tried Rick Prescott. Still nothing. License expired. 6 months ago. Meaning every fine, every patrol, every compliance officer on my lawn was operating illegally. And HOA regulations in Texas require licensed private security firms, period. I took screenshots, downloaded PDFs, logged every visit from their so-called guards. That night, I wrote a formal complaint to the state licensing board. The next morning, I printed it on legal-grade paper and slid it into a certified envelope addressed to Austin. For the first time in weeks, I felt my lungs fully inflate. They thought I was just some stubborn homeowner. They forgot I'm an engineer. And I just found the first crack in their empire. Finding Rick's expired license was just the first domino. The more I pulled, the more it unraveled. I requested HOA spending records publicly accessible, though they tried to stall. Buried inside the monthly financials were line items labeled Security Services, Emergency Consulting, HOA Legal Compliance. Every one of them, tens of thousands in payments went to companies linked to Rick or Victoria's brother-in-law. Different names, same LLC address. It was a damn shell game. They were funneling HOA funds into their own pockets while pretending to protect the community, weaponizing bureaucracy to evict anyone who didn't fit their polished, whitewashed vision. Sarah read through the invoices with me that night, her eyes narrowing. "This isn't just abuse of power," she whispered. "It's fraud. And fraud is prosecutable." I wasn't just defending a bridge anymore. I was standing in the middle of a battlefield they built with other people's money. And I was done playing nice. If Victoria wanted to play dirty, she should have learned to read survey lines. I called in a favor from my buddy Marcus, a commercial inspector with a sharp eye and a sharper tape measure. We walked her pristine property one Saturday morning, clipboard in hand, pretending to admire the landscaping. That's when we found it. Her deck extension, no permits. Her pool house, built 6 feet over the setback line. And that immaculate Japanese garden she bragged about at HOA meetings 3 feet into my property. She'd been trespassing for 3 years. And in Texas, that's not a misunderstanding. That's a legal liability. I documented everything. Photos, measurements, witness statement. No screaming, no drama. Just cold, methodical collection of truth. She declared war over a century-old bridge. But now I held proof that the Queen of Compliance had been breaking the very laws she used to bleed us dry. Game on. I filed my complaints first thing Monday. Zoning violations, trespassing, misuse of funds. Everything backed with photos, permits, maps yellowed from stress. I didn't gloat, didn't post a single word. I still believed the truth would rise on its own. But Victoria moved faster and filthier. By Thursday, I felt it in the air. At the hardware store, Jake Morrison's becoming a problem. At the gas station, he's tanking our property values. Sarah came home from the grocery store furious. The cashier wouldn't look me in the eye. Mrs. Patterson acted like I didn't exist. Then came the fake complaints. One claimed our bridge was collapsing. Another said I was leaking chemicals into the lake. I remember thinking, this isn't about code violations anymore. This is character assassination. We weren't just being evicted from the land. We were being erased from memory. And, terrifyingly, it was working. I couldn't sleep. Again. The house creaked like it remembered something I didn't. So I pulled out the old county files, mostly dust and engineering reports. But then, page 47. Secondary water rights. Lake Morrison as to 1923. I leaned in. The edges of the paper cut into my thumb. Flow maps, old stamps, faded ink signed by a man I never met but whose blood ran through mine. Then came the clause. Hidden in legalese but clear as day, flow management authority is transferable to direct descendants by deed and bloodline. I whispered it out loud like a prayer. It meant I wasn't just a landowner, I was the water keeper. Suddenly, everything Victoria built her lakefront fantasy, her HOA kingdom, was dangling from a single lever, and that lever sat in the dam, waiting for me. That weekend, I didn't walk like a victim. I walked like an engineer. The lake whispered as I circled it, its banks shallow, its curves familiar as an old scar. I traced erosion with my boot, listened to the way water lapped the stone. Then, hidden behind reeds and rust, I found it. The bypass system. Manual. Redundant. Beautiful. The brass wheel was still there like a secret left by a ghost who trusted I'd return. I turned it slowly. There was a deep, hollow knock from below. Water shifted behind steel, waiting. It wasn't just a mechanism, it was control, balance, truth. I stood up straighter. Victoria saw a man in a cabin, quiet, alone. But she never understood. Quiet doesn't mean powerless. And that dam. It didn't belong to her. It belonged to history, and to me. Tuesday morning. Coffee still hot in my hand when 3 sheriff's deputies pulled into my driveway, lights off, engines idling. Victoria was there too. BMW, spotless, arms crossed, smug as ever. Mr. Morrison, the lead deputy, said, voice tight, "We have a warrant for your arrest. Charges criminal threatening and conspiracy to commit environmental terrorism." I nearly dropped my mug. Terrorism, for defending water rights my family had held for 100 years. They cuffed me gently, like they knew it was bullshit, but they still cuffed me. Sarah stood frozen on the porch, mouth, parted eyes full of fear and rage. At the station, I sat under humming fluorescents, heart pounding like a war drum. They booked me like I was dangerous, like I was unpredictable, like I was guilty. And in that moment I saw it. Victoria didn't want to win the fight. She wanted to erase me completely. They released me on bond 2 hours later. I didn't speak on the ride to Austin, just stared out the window. Fists clenched. Pulse thudding like I was still in handcuffs. That's where Patricia Gomez came in. Water rights attorney. Sharp suit. Sharper mind. She'd defended ranchers from oil conglomerates, river communities from state seizures. She didn't blink when I told her everything about the bridge, the dam, the accusations. "Jake," she said, sliding a binder across her polished desk, "they just gave us everything we need." The federal restraining order, Victoria filed. It acknowledged my historical water rights. Legally, it was confirmation, not rejection. And, under the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1899, federal water rights override, HOA bylaws, local zoning, even sheriff's warrants. The playing field had just changed. Victoria had taken me to court thinking I'd fold. She didn't realize. She just legalized my power. Frank Wilson called me at sunrise. "I'm done, Jake," he said quietly. "I've run this dam for 30 years, and I've never seen such a mess over something so simple. I'm retiring." Then came the line that changed everything. "I'm naming you interim dam operator under your grandfather's water rights." I stared at the phone like it had just handed me the keys to a kingdom. The next day, I filed the paperwork with the state. Signed, certified, witnessed. Legally, I now had full authority over secondary flow management across Lake Morrison. No more waiting, no more warnings. I didn't need Victoria's approval. I didn't need the HOA board. I had the dam. And she knew it. That evening, 3 new security cameras were pointed directly at my cabin. Fear had finally cracked her perfect smile, and I was just getting started. The envelope came wrapped in urgency crisis intervention meeting scheduled in 24 hours. The agenda, immediate removal of Morrison Bridge due to public safety concerns. I showed up early, box of documents under one arm, calm as stone. The room buzzed with nervous residents, HOA loyalists, and one man I'd never seen, tan blazer, confident smirk. Dr. Curtis Ellison, Victoria, announced licensed structural engineer. He'd never stepped foot on my property, never seen the bridge yet, declared it a catastrophic failure risk. He used phrases like liability time bomb and urgent demolition necessity. The board listened like he was gospel. The vote came down fast. 7-1 in favor of demolition. Only Mrs. Chen stood by me, her eyes blazing with quiet fury. Victoria leaned in as she passed and whispered, "You can sue all you want. The backhoe rolls at dawn." But I wasn't done fighting. Not even close. 4:45 a.m. The courthouse lot was empty except for me, coffee-cold hands sweating through the cardboard sleeve. Inside courtroom 3C, my boots squeaked against the polished tile. My breath fogged the plastic binder cover. Time felt like a wire stretched over a canyon. At 8:30, Judge Martinez looked up. I laid it all out. Water deeds, survey maps, Frank Wilson's affidavit, a full audit trail how HOA funds were funneled into Victoria's husband's fake firm. He didn't need an hour, not even 20 minutes. He turned to the clerk, voice flat, emergency injunction granted. Restraining order effective immediately. The stamp echoed like a gunshot. I walked outside into the morning glare and called the demolition contractor. Pack it up. The order's signed. There was silence. Then a voice I'd never forget. You just made a very powerful enemy, Morrison. I laughed. My great-grandfather built a dam. You think I'm afraid of a bully? After stopping the bulldozers, I didn't celebrate. I opened my laptop and dove into HOA public records with the focus of a man dismantling a time bomb. Line by line, check by check. Every legal consultation, contractor, emergency, and compliance expense over the past year. It all led to the same addresses, businesses owned by Victoria's husband, her sister-in-law, and even a ghost LLC registered under her college roommate's maiden name. Over $30,000 siphoned straight from community funds. Not for safety, not for beautification, just to harass, intimidate, and enrich herself. I compiled a dossier, dates, signatures, payment paths, and sent copies to the State Attorney General's office, the county board, and 3 investigative journalists. This wasn't just about a bridge anymore. This was systemic rot wrapped in HOA letterhead. Victoria built her empire on intimidation, but now I had something she never expected: receipts. I waited for dusk. The lake was still almost reverent. No voices, no motors, just the hush of wind through pines and the weight of what I was about to do. I walked to the dam with Frank's old keys in my pocket and Patricia's injunction in my hand. Legal. Documented. Authorized. The secondary bypass valve creaked like it remembered me. I gave it 3 full turns. The sound it made, deep, ancient, alive, wasn't mechanical. It was judgment. Within an hour, the water level dropped nearly 6 inches. By sunrise, 18.5. Just enough to expose the resort's floating docks tilted useless. Their launch weekend canceled. Boats stranded in mud. Events postponed. Refunds demanded. The local paper ran a photo of the empty shoreline with the headline, "The lake vanishes overnight." I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The water spoke for me. The next day, something unexpected happened. Tom Rodriguez, groundskeeper at the resort, knocked on my cabin door, hat in hand, eyes darting over his shoulder. "I saw what you did," he said. "I just wanted to say thank you." Then more quietly, we all did. Turns out, not everyone in that resort was loyal to Victoria's fantasy. They'd been watching her tighten her grip on the HOA, slash budgets, cut hours, and treat local staff like disposable parts. "I grew up fishing off your bridge," Tom added. "She acts like that lake belongs to her, but we all know better." By sunset, 4 more messages trickled in: housekeepers, boat captains, even the bartender from the marina. Anonymous, cautious, but clear. "We're with you." Victoria still had her title, her board votes, her perfect white BMW. But I had something she couldn't buy or bully: the people. By Friday, the dam looked like a military checkpoint. Black SUVs parked along the access road. Men in tactical gear with earpieces and sidearms arms crossed expressions blank. Victoria had hired Blackstone Private Security, a firm run by ex-military contractors. Their job, protect the community water infrastructure from hostile actions. In other words, keep me away from my own family's dam. They weren't local. They didn't wave, didn't nod. They just watched like wolves behind mirrored sunglasses. Sarah stopped walking the dock. Neighbors whispered about the crazy guy with the bridge and a grudge. Children weren't allowed near the shoreline anymore. What used to be quiet and sacred had turned cold and paranoid. Victoria didn't just want power, she wanted fear. But I'd already seen the cracks in her armor, the desperation in her eyes, because people who bring guns to silence the truth are already losing. Saturday morning, Sarah burst through the door, face pale. "There are news trucks at the end of the street," she said. "Victoria's saying you're planning to poison the lake." I laughed. Until I saw the headlines, "Environmental Extremist Targets Lake Morrison." Domestic water terrorism plot, foiled by HOA leadership. They played footage of the armed guards, showed blurry photos of me near the dam, quoted anonymous sources about strange chemicals. I'm a licensed environmental engineer. I test water for a living. But truth doesn't matter when fear takes the mic. Neighbors stopped speaking. Someone spray-painted "murderer" on my mailbox. Even Tom went quiet, afraid for his job. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like exile. Victoria wasn't just trying to win. She was trying to bury me under a story no one would bother to fact-check. And it was working. Tom showed up just before sunset. Eyes bloodshot, voice low. She offered me 15 grand. Jake, what to sabotage the dam controls. Said if I made it look like you were trying to flood the lake, I'd get a raise and a promotion. She even promised a hero story on the news. Then he pulled out a small recorder, hit play. Victoria's voice, sharp and surgical. Just flip the switch. We'll say he went rogue. Trust me, no one questions a loyal employee. I sat down hard on the porch steps, the wind knocked out of me not from surprise but from relief. Finally. Proof. Tom looked down ashamed. I didn't know how far she'd go, but this ain't right. I gripped his shoulder. Thank you. You just saved a lot more than a bridge. Because now, I didn't just have the law, I had her own voice burying her. Monday morning, I handed Patricia the recorder. She didn't flinch, just smiled like a chess master seeing checkmate 3 moves away. By noon, she'd filed formal charges, bribery, coercion, criminal conspiracy. The evidence was airtight. Victoria's voice, her exact words, her intentions recorded and time-stamped. At 3:17 p.m., the county board convened an emergency session. By 4:00, I had it in writing interim operational authority for Lake Morrison secondary dam infrastructure, granted to me by historical deed and verified chain of title. Signed, sealed, irrefutable. Victoria tried to delay, called it suspicious, but the board ignored her. Her voice was still playing in the evidence room. That night I stood alone on the dock, moonlight flickering on the surface. Tomorrow, the showdown would be public, legal, undeniable. And this time I wouldn't just be defending the bridge, I'd be defending the truth in front of everyone. Tuesday morning dawned crisp and clear, like the air knew something monumental was coming. I arrived at the dam at 8:00 a.m. Folder of documents in hand. Boots steady on wet concrete. Victoria was already there, flanked by 2 lawyers in $1,000 suits, 3 sheriff's deputies, and her private security detail looking like they'd stepped out of a military recruitment ad. Channel 8 News had their cameras rolling. Drones buzzed overhead. "You will not pass," she declared, voice trembling beneath its steel coating. "I have a federal restraining order. He's a danger to this community." Patricia stepped forward, calm and surgical. "This order," she said, handing it to the sheriff, "was overturned yesterday. My client has full jurisdiction under federal water rights law." The sheriff read it, nodded once, then turned to Victoria. "Ma'am, step aside." Her lips parted, but no words came, because for the first time, she'd lost control. With the sheriff's nod still echoing in the cold morning air, I knelt before the old concrete housing hands, steady breath, sharp. This was it. I unscrewed the rusted access panel, revealing the brass valve wheel my great-grandfather installed a century ago. Behind me, the crowd was dead silent. I placed both hands on the wheel. Victoria shouted something, maybe a threat, maybe a prayer. I didn't care. 1 turn clockwise, then 2, then 3. From deep within the dam's belly came a groan, then a thunderous rush of water that shook the concrete beneath our feet. The bypass channels opened, a century-old engineering brought back to life. I stood face calm, soaked in mist and history. Victoria stumbled back, eyes wide in horror, as the lake level began to drop before everyone's eyes. Not with vengeance. With precision. With law. With legacy. Her empire was sinking 1 inch at a time. By sunset, the resort dock sat stranded in thick, cracked mud. Wedding tents flapped uselessly in the wind. The grand opening banners hung like eulogies for a dream drowned by truth. Victoria stood frozen on the pier, her white blazer stained with dust, her voice gone. Her investors furious. Her board silent. Her empire imploding. News vans swarmed in. Channel 8 live-streamed her downfall as state investigators rolled up with subpoenas in hand. Frank stepped forward with a federal affidavit. Tom handed over the bribery tape. And Patricia. She smiled like a wolf in court heels. The sheriff read the charges out loud: bribery, misuse of HOA funds, obstruction of water rights. Victoria didn't cry. She cracked. A trembling, furious whisper. "You ruined me." I met her eyes. "No, Victoria. You did that yourself." Behind me, applause broke out. Honest, raw, thunderous applause from neighbors who finally saw the truth. Justice wasn't blind today. It watched and acted. This wasn't about revenge. It never really was. It was about a bridge built by calloused hands, a lake that raised generations, and a truth no HOA form could erase. When someone tries to tear down your family's legacy, to mock it, bulldoze it, erase it with signatures and smug grins, you don't stay quiet. You stand up. You protect what matters. You remind them not everything old is outdated and not all of us forget where we came from. So drop a comment with your own HOA horror story. I read every one, and I've got ideas for dealing with these petty tyrants. And if you want to hear about the corrupt city council that tried to steal an elderly farmer's land through eminent domain, and how century-old mineral rights saved her farm, hit that subscribe button. That's a story for next time. And hey, if this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe. We're just getting started.